All right, we'll get this thing started. Thank you, everyone for joining us again. I'm really excited about today with Coach D and Coach Pape to share some things. Just to kind of start us out here, some of our norms. So we're going to be hearing mostly Coach D and Coach Pape's ideas. They're ideas that I really respect a lot. It might be different than, your ideas or my ideas. I know Coach D and Coach Pape and I, we debate baseball a lot, and there's not always one right way to get things done in baseball. Assume positive intent. Between Coach D and Coach Pape, they're two of the more positive people I know as coaches. So make sure that we're just assuming that we're all here to help Sauk Prairie Baseball. Keep an eye on your mute. Like if you want to share something, unmute yourself and ask a question or share something. That's great. If you're not sharing, please mute yourself just so we don't pick up that background noise. You can add questions in the comment section. I'll try my best to see them. I'm still kind of a work in progress with some of the chat features. And we are Sauk Prairie Baseball. Thanks for being here. Our goal is kind of develop some common coaching language and strategies, increase collaboration among coaches at all levels, and learn from each other. So our two guys today that we have Coach Bill Dettman and Coach Darin Pape. For those of you that don't know Coach Dettman coached from 1978 to 2011, 349 career wins, 3 state tournament appearances, a state champion in 96, and he is a Wisconsin Baseball Coaching Association Hall of Famer. We have Coach Pape. He's been our varsity coach since 2017, and he's been a head coach in our program since 1999, and he's also a friend of Mike McCarthy. Yeah. All right. So our first kind of topic here is describe your coaching journey. So I think we got to start with the most experience here. So Coach D, just I guess tell us about your coaching career, how it started. You might tell us some of your best teams, your toughest teams, your favorite teams. Just, tell us about your coaching.
Okay. Well, I've been thinking about the Ted Williams approach to hitting lately, so I wanted to kind of tie some of my comments in with that. I started at Sauk in 78, like you mentioned. I went close to 20 years. I think I went 18 years with very mixed results, a very poor record overall. And it was very fortunate that I had a lot of respect from a lot of people in town, I think, because normally it may have been bye-bye time for me. Anyway, something happened in 95, and all of a sudden I just had a group of kids that did better. Not that they were a favorite team. I really loved all my teams equally, but for some reason, and I'm not sure maybe it was the Dean Salveson summer program that put this group over the top. But what I was going to say was describing hitters. Today I was thinking about the Ted Williams approach and Jeff Pahokee. He had two things really in common with Ted. One was Pahokee was a really fussy hitter, and he always wanted to get a good ball to hit. And number two, like Ted Williams, Jeff Pahokee believed he was the best hitter in the ballpark, and he believed he could hit any pitcher. So we're in the state tournament for my first time, which was a thrill after 18, 19 years. We're playing Hortonville, and it's a tie game at the end of 7 innings. We go in, it's the bottom of 8, and Hortonville walks Stuffles to pitch to Jeff Pahokee. The bases are loaded. I'm in the third base coaching box looking down, wetting my pants, and I'm thinking, really, my head is going through too much of the future. I'm thinking, if we can somehow do this, we are in gold or silver ball territory. Anyway, I don't know how Jeff's feeling. I'm thinking, Jeff's probably a basket case like me. So anyway, long story short, Pahokee waits for a good pitch to hit and lines an absolute shot to right field. Big pile up. We win the game. And afterwards, I said to Jeff, what were you thinking up there? How did you handle it? There's a lot of pressure. And Jeff says, I was pissed. I was mad. I couldn't believe they wanted to pitch to me. I thought, isn't that the attitude? That's the Ted Williams attitude. I'm better than that guy, and I want to bat right now with this whole thing on the line. So anyway, that's story number one, okay? That come through good, guys?
Absolutely, Coach. What were some of those teams like in the 70s and 80s?
They were wonderful teams, I can talk about, Davey, were you on the team with Roy Trudell? Chris Rott was our relief pitcher. We had no pitching, and all we wanted to do was get to Chris Rott because he could pick a guy off of third base. We went up to Baraboo, and we're 3-12. Baraboo's 15-0. It's graduation night. And we had a great game with them, and somehow we prevailed in 10 innings. And guys got back, wear their baseball uniform under their graduation gowns, and graduated. I remember that one. I remember getting beat a lot in tournaments by teams like La Crosse Central. It seemed like we could never beat them. And I was always interested in Frank Thornton and how he ran his program, which I could talk about for a while, but we always had fun playing baseball. And I think that's the greatest example was, hey, 3-12, you're going to play against a 15-0 team in tournament with a lot better pitcher than you. And it was just all about having fun. And when you play the game that way, you got a chance against anybody.
All right, Coach Pape, tell us about a little bit about your coaching journey.
Yeah, you had on there, and when you go back to the bios there, I Coach D's pretty modest, but the over 300 wins in his career is pretty awesome, and I'm proud to say that I was a member of his staff for a long time. I wasn't necessarily responsible for any of those wins, but I remember being on his staff. So my coaching journey started as the freshman coach years and years ago for Coach D. And it was an awesome opportunity because you get to be in charge and you get to be the guy that calls the shots. However, it doesn't matter that it's at the freshman level at that time, but it's been great. My varsity resume isn't quite as extensive or as long, and I could only imagine coaching varsity baseball for as many years as Coach D did. So, describing my best team, it's been so fun over the years, and baseball is that sport that you never dread going to practice. You never dread going to games. I've coached other sports, football and wrestling, where practice can be a grind and it's hard. It's hot and you get sweaty, and in baseball you can be sweating and loving every second of it. So one of my favorite memories of one of my best teams, the last couple of years we had, 2018, we had a team that won 16 games, and that's the most games since. And I was going back through the record books all the way back to, now, to be fair, a little asterisk by that, but it goes back to Coach D's playoff state teams, but we play more games now. We play 26 games in a regular season. So 2018 was my most successful varsity team. We had a lot of good players, but we had a lot of good role players, and I think that's probably the key. The best team has good ball players clearly, but then has others that know their role and accept their role and play that way. honestly, and Clint's here, but one of my all-time favorite teams is Clint's freshman year when I was coaching freshman ball at that time. That was a group of kids that, and I'm sure Coach D will be able to attest to. It's probably my first 5 years, and I don't want to say how old you are, Clint, but those kids just love to play. They just wanted to come to practice every day. They wanted to compete. There was no infighting. And I think they only lost one game that year, and they'll say it's a game they should have won. But that one was one of my favorites in terms of the team that just had great chemistry and they played together because they just loved to play. Your toughest team, I'm not sure if that means the one where we struggled or not, but
Yeah,
go ahead, Luke.
I was thinking maybe like a team that challenged you the most. Like, they could have been a successful team on the field, but a team that maybe really challenged you and what that was. And you don't have to name names or specifics.
Yeah,
but
no. I
can
can think exactly of what you're referring to there. I don't have to say any years or names or anything, but one of the toughest teams to coach are the ones where there are people that just kind of show up because they're there. They're not necessarily there because they love playing baseball and they don't really care one way or another. That's what kind of makes it tough as a coach. Coach D didn't mention Gordy Gillespie's name, but I will because he was Coach D's mentor, which Coach D is my mentor. So who's influenced me? Well, Coach D clearly, but by way of Gordy Gillespie, I would say. And one of my all-time favorite quotes from Gordy at a clinic, you guys have all heard this before, but Gordy stood up in front of the group of 300 coaches and said, "Gentlemen, the thing you have to remember is that they don't love it as much as you do." And that's something that's always stuck in my brain. The reason we're here tonight is because of our passion and love for baseball. And sometimes you get those kids there that aren't as committed to baseball. So when you get that can sometimes make it tough. They're not as into it, and it makes it harder for them to work hard, which kind of makes your job as a coach that much better or makes it tougher. Favorite team, this is going to sound cliche, but I loved every single team that we've had. There are things about them that they drive you nuts, but you love them. So I don't really have a favorite team. Who's influenced me, clearly that's Coach Dettman. And then any of the coaches that I've seen, baseball's that sport that it's like going through a buffet line. You can pick and choose what you like and add it to your plate, and what works for one person doesn't always work for everybody else. So you pick and choose your favorites. So I love continuing to learn. These opportunities are great. I love going to clinics and listening to speakers and trying to take notes. And then the last one, I guess, why have you been coaching for so long? One, I do it because I love the sport, but two, I get to work with not just the kids, but the staff I work with. Getting to work on Coach D's staff and be one of the components of his staff, and then convincing him to come back and be a part of the staff that I'm on with a bunch of baseball nutsos. That's what makes coaching so much fun. And I really appreciate what Luke said at the beginning with, we don't always agree. And there'll be plenty of times where we'll stand in a dugout and we'll disagree on what we should do or how something should be done. But in the end, we get along so well that it's kind of a brotherhood. And I appreciate that. And that's maybe one of the reasons why I love coaching baseball and Sauk so much.
Coach D, looking at like your best teams and your favorite teams, what were the components of your best teams, and maybe what made them that way?
Well, I'm gonna talk about the '96 team because it's hard to say that any team that hasn't won a gold ball is better than one that has. So I think it might be a good idea to just describe that team, and I think go through the lineup and talk about what what that team possessed that made it a little bit extra better. So let me tell you what I remember about the lineup. Our first 4 hitters were Frosch, that's Davey's brother, Sorg, Stuffles, and Jeff Paholke. I already told you a little about Jeff, but the team had explosive speed, and Darin Frosch maybe the most. It also had Sorg and Stuffles and Bean and Wittenbach. These guys not only had explosive speed, but they had developed it by training themselves. So really, for all of you guys, you might want to think about, what if this was your team? Do you want to make them a base stealing team, a running team? Or do you want to sit back and watch them hit the ball, because they were extremely good at that? I know a couple things. Now, I knew I wanted Darin to bunt because of his explosive speed. Whenever Darin Frosch laid one on the third baseline, I knew he was on first. He could outrun the ball. And so that's really, I mean, that's why Darin was chosen as the leadoff hitter of that team. In the 2-hole was Sorg. I like a left-handed hitter there because it gives Darin a chance to steal if he wants. But guys, think about it. Do you want Darin to steal? It's going to move your first baseman off again. You have to figure that out. But Sorg that year, was it 95 or 90? I think it was 96. He hit the ball consistently. This is my opinion. He hit the ball as consistently as hard as I remember anybody ever hitting it on one of my teams. And even if it was an out, it was a line drive to the center fielder. So, I mean, you couldn't beat him in the 2-hole. And you have Stuffles in the 3-hole, and he was just a winning player. He just made winning plays. And it's pretty hard to argue when he gets voted as the player of the year in the state of Wisconsin. That's impressive. And then you have Paholke mopping things up in the cleanup hole. You know, you could just stand back and watch that. They were going to score runs. You have Bean, Wittenbach, and Vandenberg, 7, 8, and 9. Normally, these guys are the top of your lineup. And then even the guys on the bench too. I mean, that was a tough year to sit on the bench, because those guys in a regular year would have been playing all the time. So that's sort of a rundown on that team. I don't know where else I want to go from this. You guys have any questions about that team, or anybody want to make a comment? Do you know whether I ran them a lot, whether we stole a lot of bases, or whether we sat back and protected our outs? What would you do if you had that kind of lineup?
Well, something I noticed, so for our alumni tournament this last year, or maybe it was 2 years ago, Trent got a whole crew of those guys together. And, you know, some of those guys haven't played baseball in a long time. Like, I don't think Casey Vandenberg and Nick Bean have played a whole lot of baseball in the last, since that game. But their level of competitiveness and compete was exceptional still. Like, it was hard, but they fought and battled. Is that something that you saw in practice, in games, just that, like, overall extreme competitiveness?
Totally. And I mean, preparation wise, some of those guys were preparing 12 months out of the year. Even you mentioned Bean and Wittenbach and Vandenberg, with the explosive speed that a couple of those guys had was not natural. It was something that they developed. And you saw it year round when the top end of that lineup absolutely loved baseball 12 months out of the year. They were sleeping in the ballpark at times when they shouldn't. They were camping out in center field when they maybe shouldn't have been. But back to my original question, You think you'd turn that into a running team, or would you protect your outs and let them knock each other in, and why? Anybody want to tackle that one?
Coach D, if I can just jump in on that. Well, first of all, Coach, would you mind tilting your camera a little bit so I can see more on your forehead?
Okay.
There he is. Okay, there he is. Awesome.
This is my beard.
Even better. You've earned that. So if I just were to jump in, I would say the end result kind of justifies the journey that you took to get there. I think obviously those guys, and I wasn't on the staff yet, but it was fun to watch them play, and they competed, and I know Trent's in this group too, but they competed all the time, and they were phenomenal athletes, and those guys had a ton of success in sports all through high school. So it wasn't just baseball, but you could tell that baseball was the thing that kind of brought all those abilities together. There was that kind of bulldog mentality, and we use that expression a lot in the baseball world, that, being described as a bulldog, that's a compliment on the baseball diamond. And those guys they weren't going to accept losing. And that was, I think, part of the thing that, like Lucas is asking about. You're not going to accept mediocrity.
Good comment there. And we were behind in the state title game. We dropped behind in the 6th inning, and they came in, and Wittenbach ran the huddle, and he was mad. He said, "We are not letting this go again. We are not going to do it." And it was him and Bean and Vandenberg, the bottom of the lineup, that knocked in that run. And I guess I'll answer my own question now. We like to run. It's sort of like you got a sword, you got a frosh. It's like having a good racehorse. They want to run. So some of them had the green light. Several of them had the green light. But the reason why you want them to run is because when you get later, and it's pretty easy to see in hindsight, but when you get later in the tournament, later in the season, you get to the tougher games, pitching will dominate. And at that time, you can no longer rely just on knocking the runs in. You have to do it in other ways sometimes. And the story I remember is, this was before we had done anything. This was the sectional at Viroqua, in 95. And Darin Frosch is standing on second base, and we need a run. We're not hitting the ball particularly well. So I give him the steal sign, and stealing third is dangerous. He takes off. The catcher throws the ball in the left field, and there's the run that gets us to state tournament. So I guess my point is that the way we handled it was to be a running team. Doesn't mean somebody else can't do it, because Earl Weaver or whoever always said, you don't want to give any of your outs away. You get 21 outs. You better be careful with them.
Coach Pape, how have you maybe changed as a coach since you started? Or is there like a mistake that you recognize that you've learned of? So how have you evolved as a coach?
There you go. I think the biggest thing is, when I started off coaching baseball at the freshman level, most everything I did, and I had very fortunate. I hope Paul's on here. I didn't see is Paul Renzenberger on here or not, but I convinced him to be my assistant coach, and he volunteered with me for years. And I think or at least I thought at that time that I had to take charge and teach the kids everything. Yeah. And I think I kind of was a control freak, and I wasn't willing to give up of any of the control. I wanted to be the final say, and I wanted to make sure that they got everything that I wanted from me. Probably the biggest change that has happened, and I don't know that was necessarily a mistake, because sometimes you have 20 kids and only one or two coaches, and you got to do the best you can with what you've got. But the way that I've changed or evolved is getting more people involved. And I'm not afraid to have people involved in our program that are extremely experienced. Some might be threatened by having a Hall of Fame coach as one of your assistants. And Coach D has never, ever done anything but be helpful as far as so I'm, I think and Coach D even told me that it's, some people might feel threatened having all these baseball junkies on your staff and people that are willing to do things like you, Lucas, setting up this Zoom chat and just talking hitting all the time. So I know that as a coach, it's not my job to do everything. And I appreciate having experienced people helping out. I also know that, and I value the assistant coaches in our program. That's the two lower levels at the high school, the JV and the JV2. That's where your money is made. That's where the learning of the game happens. And having good assistant coaches is like having gold in your pocket. So not just at the varsity level, but, we've got 7 people on our staff officially at the high school, and there's only 4 paid positions. So if you're not very good in math, that means there's a lot of volunteering going on. But people wanting to be a part of something pretty special. What do you like to get better at as a coach? Everything. I feel like I'm a pretty positive person. I'm very knowledgeable of the game. I don't want to claim that I know anything more than anybody else. But I think what makes me maybe different is the fact that I'm the first to say I don't know everything, and I'm not going to try to claim to be an expert. I just want to continue to learn and continue to get people involved that know things, and we can work on all the finer points of this sport. I'm just going to answer the last question too, Luke, before we move. What's changed the most in high school baseball? I don't have the same experience level as Coach D, but I don't think much has changed. There's some rule changes that have happened over the years, but I think kids are still kids. Baseball hasn't changed very much in 100+ years, so it's still the same great sport that it was when it was invented. I do think there are some additional challenges, that there's more distractions, I guess I'll call them, that make other things appealing for kids. But the distractions, when any of you were playing, it was just a different kind of a distraction. Maybe it was hunting and fishing, or maybe it was something else. But now there's a lot of outside stimuli, I would say. And so getting additional support and getting the kids to buy in, that's still a challenge, like it's always been.
All right. When I think of something that's changed, man, that pitch count has really impacted the game. I think I've been going through some old newspaper clippings, and I think back to Sam's senior year. I think he pitched Tuesday and Friday of the regional tournament, and now that would be, I don't think he would have been able to go, right? I mean, he would have needed 3 days rest. I mean, I think he probably threw 100 on Tuesday and said he was good to go for Friday, and I think he went 8 before they snuck a homer off of him. I forgot how good that game was, Coach D. You remember that one? At Wanakee graduation night?
Wanakee, yeah.
Sam had a 2-run homer in the 8th, and then gave up a 2-run homer that the guy hit a pitch opposite field down the line that snuck fair for a walk-off homer.
Yeah. He was in a home run streak right there.
You got anything that you really learned over the course of your career that was kind of an aha moment, or do you remember any mistakes that you made that it's like, man, I wish I would have done that differently, or coached that team differently?
Well, I could have, like right now, coaching with Darin, it's very easy for me to talk with parents and kind of just be I don't want to call it a schmoozer, but just, talking to parents, making them feel like they're a welcome part of the program. When I was a head guy, I always felt like if I talked to a parent, it would look like somebody was getting an advantage. I was the first guy to hit the exit. I was afraid of that. And so I don't know, I should have brought the Gordy book upstairs. He has a great paragraph on working with parents, keeping your professional distance, at the same time being respectful to them. So, and that's probably an area that I could have certainly been better at. I think one of the things that's really changed, and since Davey played and some of the rest of the guys, is, you know, it's more like now that kids have, in a way, gotten everything. I was going through some stuff downstairs the other day, and I saw a baseball card from my 9-year-old son, Dan. He had his own baseball card, you know, and we started giving trophies for everybody got a trophy, you know, and I'd go to middle school and somebody would have a shirt that said they went to the state tournament, and then they said, yeah, we went with 28 other teams and they all paid the same. So I guess that really isn't as relevant as I made it out to be, because, you know, baseball, if you're going to play baseball, you're going to have to learn to deal with failure. You're going to fail whether you get a trophy or a base. It doesn't matter. So maybe that's really irrelevant. Baseball is going to teach you how to fail. And sometimes we just don't want our kids to fail. And I guess that's just natural. I just think it's really grown that way over the years. My opinion.
Yeah, that kind of leads right into the next topic here. Advice for parents. So, I mean, there's a few different ways you can look at it. Advice for parents as they prepare for varsity, but also advice for parents of younger players. Coach Pape, do you want to start out with this one?
Sure. Advice for parents to prepare for varsity baseball. I guess the first thing I would say is just get your son to love playing the game. And that goes back to, and I would say that I could lump that with the second one, advice for parents of young players. Just get them to love playing the game. Clearly, you want to work on the basic fundamentals. And as when I was working with elementary school age kids, when I used to teach the summer school class and we'd hit off the tee, you'd have parents or kids talking about, oh, I don't do that anymore. I don't play t-ball anymore. And that's when you use the varsity and or the major league players and use them as examples of they still hit off a tee every day, and they work on their swing. It's just if you can get them to kind of, I don't want to say master, but work on the basic fundamentals and kind of learn. Coach Ransberger and I talk about kids' baseball IQ. Some of the stuff is really hard to teach other than when you're playing. You just have to kind of get a feel for it. Parents of young players, just go out and play catch with them. Go out and don't overdo it. Don't make them play ball when they're not up for it. You'd rather have them begging for more than saying, I'm really tired, I don't want to do this anymore. That I would say I'd start with that and just making it so that the kids actually love it. Do you want me to keep going, Luke, or you want Coach D to talk about those?
Yeah, Coach D can talk about them. Yeah.
Well, I mean, you sure can't please everybody, and you're going to make some parents very angry, and there's just no getting around that. But I think when kids are starting out, it's a big question when to start giving them instruction. I'd say study the game and figure out exactly what you want to do when you do start giving them instruction. I think you want to keep it simple, and there are ways to do that. But that's point number one. What age, when do you want to do, and when do you actually want to try to develop some fundamentals? I mean, I think kids like Jeff and Steve Pahokee, I don't know if anybody ever taught them to hit a baseball. You just watch them swing, and they had beautiful swings like right from the get-go. So
I think those guys played a lot of wiffle ball games and baseball games in their backyard. Is the stories I've heard, that they played a lot of games in the yard.
I think that's a great point. Wiffle ball is fantastic, and even for when you start instructing kids, if you're going to start throwing pop-ups and expect them not to get hit in the face, you better be using a wiffle ball or a rubber ball, unless you want to develop fear. And fear is the greatest issue that we're dealing with baseball. So I am a big advocate of the wiffle. I mean, you guys know that we hit wiffles all the way through high school. But at a young age, I think for safety purposes, incrediballs, rubber balls, wiffle balls, sometimes people want to really take a macho approach, and kids want to hit hard balls right away. And I get that, but first thing you got to be able to do is catch the ball.
The ball I found as a parent of 2 young kids is we got this ball pit when they were young. So like the ball pit balls are super light. I love those things for like, I mean, I've used them with the catching camps and stuff, because you miss it, it doesn't hurt. Today, Roman had on a toy chest protector and he wanted me to throw balls at him. And I missed and hit him right in the face, but he just laughed about it. I mean, it doesn't, so he's getting that like practice, I guess. I mean, it's just playing, but it avoids that hurt, because I remember seeing, kids at the younger ages, if once they get hit with the ball, it really can kind of impact their feeling towards baseball if they get injured.
Yep.
So I think most of the people on here, a lot of the people on here have kids in our youth program. You guys both coached your kids at all the way through, including the varsity level. So I guess, what was it like coaching your boys? What advice do you have for coaching your child? And is there a moment that you would do different, or a situation that you remember maybe not handling in the best way? Coach Pape, do you want to?
Yeah, I'll start with that one. Coaching your own son in baseball creates the kind of the situation where you don't go, it doesn't go away. You go to practice, you go to games, you go home, you sit around the dinner table, you're driving in the car, going to and from practice sometimes when they're younger, and you just, it's hard to get away from it. But that's something that, as if I had to do it different, we wouldn't sit around the kitchen table and talk about it unless he brought it up. Because you have to understand that you have to put your coaching hat on when you're the coach, but you have to put your dad hat on when you're at home, when you're with your kids. It can be stressful. I'm not going to lie. It's hard because you want your kid to be super successful. As a coach, you want your whole team to be successful. But of course, as a dad, there's that added extra element of when you want your son or daughter, if you're coaching your daughter, to be successful. And you agonize over their failures, but you celebrate their successes. And, it was hard. I'm not going to sugarcoat that thing. That was hard. But it was also when they had success and, just an opportunity to kind of celebrate too, because there were times where we were frustrated and we'd come home and it'd be pretty quiet sitting around the dinner table. But when you have success, hitting a walk-off or hitting a home run to beat the defending state champs from Wanakee, your kid was the pitcher and then the kid that hit the home run. Those are really good days around the dinner table. That's pretty awesome. But I guess my advice would be just to try to remove yourself from it if you can when you're not at practice or at the game. And it's hard. I'm not going to say it's easy because I couldn't do it. But I don't know, maybe Coach D could. Maybe when Dave and Dan were coming through, it was different. But it was hard for me.
Yeah, it can be difficult. But there's nothing as good as, we all love our kids, and there's nothing as good as doing something you love, like baseball with your kids. So when they're saying, Dad, we want to go to the gym, hit us some ground balls, you're like, hey, that's pretty cool. That they it was just it was a real highlight for me to have Dan and Dave be members of our team. I mean, I'm talking about a big highlight of my life. But my biggest point is, and I didn't realize this, and I don't think anybody does, is that I was biased towards Dan and Dave. I thought they were probably better than I was biased. And a parent sees their own child differently than other people. And I think it's really true for everybody. They're biased towards their own kid, and that's why it becomes such a difficult triangle between parents and coaches and kids, because of that natural bias that we all have.
Yep, and I would add that, just it's real easy to fall into that, and like you said, everybody's biased, including me. Many times that's why coach's kid, he's the one. Now, to be fair, many times the coach's kids are the ones that have had the most coaching coming into a situation too. So I'm not saying that it's bad. But that's why many times the coaches' kids are the ones that are playing the most critical positions up the middle, usually, and behind the plate, all the way up to center field. But yeah, you do create a bias, but then you do create a little bit of, some of my favorite baseball memories actually of my son are when I wasn't coaching him. It's when he was playing and somebody else was his coach, or he's able to just play without me being there, other than sitting in the bleachers maybe. So sometimes it's good to just be a dad in addition to being the coach.
So, Coach D, one of the last times we talked, you talked about some of your stronger teams, and how did their youth coaches impact, I guess, the varsity team that you then got to coach? Thinking back to like your 95, 96 teams, and really, I mean, I think you kind of mentioned kind of 95 through, into the 2000s.
Well, in those days, it was really different. And it was, for me, I had a different approach. I sort of stayed out of their way, and they sort of stayed out of my way. I mean, Dean Salveson did a lot of coaching with those guys. He gave them a lot of their reps, a lot of their games. They used to go camping. Instead of getting hotels, they were out camping every weekend and playing in tournaments. There was always great respect both ways. Jim Beyer, Kurt Koenig. I don't know how I lucked out, but all of these great summer coaches I had actually graduated high school with me. So there was a lot of respect both ways, but we pretty much left each other alone. I mean, because I chose to pretty much coach baseball 3 months out of the year. And the only time that changed was when I started out for a year or two, I coached Legion. And then when Dan and Dave came along, then I went to the summer program as well. But, near the end of my career, I started to run a few clinics. I saw what other coaches were doing, and trust me, they were doing a lot more than me, because I chose to operate in a certain way. And I guess that worked out for me. I mean, you have to figure out how much time are you going to take from your own family, and how much time you're going to put into this. I put a heck of a lot of stress on myself during the season. I thought about it all the time. I studied it all the time. But I guess I'm not an expert on the summer program. I think there's other people who were doing better than I was on that account.
Coach Pape, any thoughts on how our youth coaches, how they impact you at the varsity level, or things you would like to see youth coaches working on more, developing in our youth program?
Yeah, I guess I would say that the biggest thing that would benefit us at the varsity level would be if we didn't focus so much on winning individual games at the youth level and focused more on building fundamentals and being more solid on with your glove and building arm strength and focusing on some technique and learning the game, but not necessarily putting all of the emphasis on winning the game. And I think, it feels good to win. It really does. But I think the biggest thing would be the thing that helps the varsity program, the high school program as a whole, is if we just work on the fundamentals and we get kids that, again, going back to, and I'm seeing some younger guys in here, getting kids that love the game, that want to continue playing when they get to high school, and that they have a solid foundation of skills. We do our preseason goal setting meeting with each individual player, and I don't think I've ever asked one, how many games did you win when you were in fourth grade or fifth grade? That doesn't necessarily carry over. More so just having that solid foundation and having the skills to work on. So, and it's hard because as an adult, and that's going back to that Gordy comment from kind of at the beginning, as the adults, we're the ones that take wins and losses more seriously than 9, 10, 11, 12, 13-year-olds. They bounce back really quickly. And the sooner we can focus on the positive and having them learn that failure and being able to recover quickly, and that might be from one at bat to the next. Just kind of pick yourself up, dust yourself off, and get the next one. And if we can do that, that's great. And I'm gonna brag a little bit, going back to that whole coaching your son thing. My son was pitching in the game against Wanakee. He gave up a 2-run bomb that I don't think has landed yet to Nate Stevens, for them to take the lead. So he was also 0 for at the plate on the day. But because he's pretty strong mentally to stay on the mound and keep pitching, and then he ends up hitting the home run to win. That mental toughness, I think, is also the thing that we need to make sure we work on. It's okay to fail, provided you pick yourself up and try to not fail again. That failure that happens 70% of the time in this sport, you're still a Hall of Famer in the end. And that's something that I think we just need to try our best to teach these kids is you're going to fail, and you're going to fail repeatedly. It might go days or games without success, but just keep battling and persevere through that. And that's a big thing. That's a big thing.
I just came across this tweet like right before our meeting from John Gordon, and it kind of made me think about this kind of slide. And it is, culture is like a tree. It takes years to cultivate and grow, and yet it can be chopped down in a minute. So as a coach at the varsity level, or in our, just in our whole Sauk Prairie program, what are some important aspects of team culture? How do you build it? Yeah, I guess all these questions. I know Coach D has done a variety of unique things over his years to build culture that I was a part of. Then maybe also like who exemplifies, or what is an example of a person who exemplifies team culture? Coach D, do you want to kind of start us with team culture?
Yeah, I want to talk about a different team that had a culture, and that was Lacrosse Central. As long as I coached during 35 years, it seemed like Lacrosse Central, and the sectional used to be, as you guys know, in Sauk every year. It seemed like Lacrosse Central was always there. we came close a few times. We could never beat them. And more often than not, they moved on to the state tournament. So, I observed that team. Frank Thornton is just a small town guy from Portage. In fact, his passion besides baseball was he used to be on the pit crew for Dick Trickle at the Dells Raceway. Anyway, Thornton always had, sort of like Darin, he always had a ton of coaches with him. One of them was Jay Buckley. I don't know if you know the guy who ran their Legion program. Now he runs the baseball tours. Anyway, La Crosse Central had so many coaches that there would be two of them, and their only job during infield was to roll balls down the third baseline to see if bunts would go fair or foul. He had a lot of coaches, and his teams were always very tough. And I asked Frank, I said, geez, how do you do it? And what's the secret of your program? He said, Billy, as soon as we're done here, as soon as the state tournament's over, the very next weekend, we're on the road. And we're on the road for the rest of the summer. The kids are playing a lot of baseball. That's the bottom line, right? That's the one way that you can build culture. And then the other thing La Crosse had, and I don't know how much Frank was involved or Jay was involved, but it was the Stars for Tomorrow. And you guys kind of remember that was a humongoid youth program. The youth program is critical. And in a nutshell, that's how La Crosse Central did it. I mean, we played them my last year. And you guys maybe remember that Tom Seiler beat them that day. We made a bunch of noise and they didn't. They were just kind of looking over like they got us. And I'm looking up in the stands and there's Frank Thornton. And I'm thinking, hey, this wouldn't have happened if Frank Thornton would have been in the other dugout. His team would have been mentally tougher. They wouldn't have backed down, So those are just some of the things I observed with La Crosse Central that I tried to build in Sauk when possible.
Coach Pape, what would be describe a player who exemplifies like positive team culture, like that, how you would love every guy to act like?
Yeah, there's been a lot, and I'm going to steal one of Coach D's just because I coached him too when he was a freshman, but it was Coleman Breinig. Coleman was a good ball player, but he played with a group of kids that were really, really good, and so he struggled to find time to get on the field, but he was always promoting positivity, and he just kind of just oozed positivity every time he was on the field. More recent example, I have to throw Adam Duran's name out there because he built a lot of, he worked his fanny off to make himself a better player, but he didn't ever do anything to alienate himself from his teammates, and he never kind of carried himself at a certain level. He likes to take younger kids under his wing, and he comes back and volunteers. The day we did our youth evaluations, he was there fielding ground balls and catching balls. I mean, those are the kinds of guys. And then the other ones I'm going to say are just, it's important that you have positive coaches on your staff. I think having positive coaches is what helps to, live by example. And, at the varsity level for me and Paul Ranzenberger and Bill Dettman and Lucas Koenig and Alex Mayer and John Adair and Brendan Coy and then a host of volunteers that want to help us out. Being positive promotes a positive culture, and just trying to kind of live that life. Players feed off of the coaches, and if the coach is positive, it's easier to get a player to buy in. That I think is important. We've had a lot of really, really, really good kids. I can think of a bunch over the last even 4 to 5 years since I've been in charge, but that that's important to have. Having that ace pitcher or your number one shortstop or catcher is really important, but also having that guy that's number 10 or 11 that accepts his role and makes the most of his opportunities when he gets a chance. That's key. And sometimes when kids are younger, the last clinic I went to, it was talking about coaches, or maybe I guess it was a virtual clinic, and there was a bunch of coaches sitting on a panel, and they were talking about how by the time athletes get to college, the college coaches are the first people that have ever told them the truth. Because sometimes we put our kids up on a pedestal and we tell them how great they are, and we never really kind of give them the truth. So it's hard to kind of do that. They always get the positivity from the coaches at the high school level and parents at home and stuff like that. And so I don't know, I'm probably talking in circles, but it's hard to find that kid that's truly the team player, because a lot of them are playing, they want to be on the field, and if they're not, they're angry. And some just being on the field isn't good enough. They want more. But we've been pretty blessed that with having as many coaches as we do, we kind of take the kids on and we break them down into smaller parts, and we make an example out of attempting to connect with each of them on a personal level too, not just can you hit a fastball or a breaking ball, but how are things going? Are things going okay? So that's connecting to each kid too.
Yeah, when you talk about Coleman and Adam, I think of like two aspects of that team culture. I think of Coleman as the guy that the result of the team brought him extreme joy, whether he was the person who, made the catch or not. He was happy for how the team's success, and he put the team's success over his personal ambitions, and that's really hard to do. And he, exemplified that. And then with Adam, he was, as good of a player as we've had, and he put in the work. Like, he was the guy that was staying after practice, getting extra reps in always, and that kind of leadership of leading by example and putting in the extra work, I think is really valuable. Coach D, I think this is something that always impressed me as a coach that you did is you were able to build culture and buy-in from players, 13, 14, 15. What strategies did you use? And I know at the youth level, that's really hard. And that's a challenge that coaches have, is how do we involve and make sure the players that maybe aren't ready to be on the field still feel involved with the team?
Well, I think we are often guilty of paying too much attention to the more gifted player, and I always try to realize that, and it might be who comes to mind right away is Joe Block from the 96 team. I mean, he was the last player on the team. It doesn't mean, Joe Block right now is a children's doctor in Milwaukee. He's the more successful, quotes, person than anybody who was on that. He's I guess it's important just not to recognize kids for their ability, but I want to go back and just touch on the culture thing a little bit. I think, even though I didn't go, that it's all about getting kids together. And Darin's taking them to Florida. That puts your kids together for a while, and that can help create a culture. You ask, you see girls get interviewed after their soccer state championship or whatever, and what are they all they mention is they had spaghetti dinners. I mean, what do you remember? We had spaghetti dinners. What does that tell you? Kids want to be with, and I mean, part of the problem these days is everybody's running off playing with a different team. Our hometown Sauk Prairie kids aren't playing together. I think it hurts our culture in a lot of ways. And I know there's great benefits to the GRBs, et cetera, and there's great instruction there. However, I think we've maybe lost something there. You know, when Dan and Dave were around, we went to the Field of Dreams in Iowa for 5 games. We had a blast, and they still talk about it. You know, Leo Joyce almost beat that team from Ohio. Well, we lost all the games, but we might have won one. But you know, that was a big part of building culture.
Yeah, I think of my sophomore year, we went to the Roxbury Tavern every Tuesday. That's how we built culture.
Right.
I mean, I was only 15. No, he had Taco Tuesdays every Tuesday night out there, and we went out there after the game and had tacos. And you know, the thing that
The coach didn't need to go along, you know.
No, and I guess the other powerful thing for me was I didn't have a driver's license, and one of the seniors, Ben Ganser, would drop me off at home, and you know, this senior that I didn't really know before making that team, he volunteered to me, hey, you know, you live on the way home, I'll give you a ride. And for me, he was one of those chemistry guys, one of those culture guys that he was a kind of a part-time player, and you know, he was looking out for me, the sophomore on the team that was, you know, helping the team.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that, Lucas, just to your point, sometimes that doesn't come natural to a lot of kids. So as a coach, that's kind of one of those things that you're encouraging them and you're trying to get them to develop their culture. And yeah, the more time we're together, and Razzy's on here, he can talk about the 5 days we spent with our team in 2018 in Florida. That's a lot of togetherness, and it's a lot of time where you are with your buddies, and it's kind of becomes a band of brothers, and you practice all the time together. You sleeping in the same dorm rooms, and had fun together, but we worked hard. And I think that, you know, that experience, and unfortunately we haven't been able to go back since, and we're hoping to go soon. So if your kids are coming up, still want to kind of do that. I also think the opportunity we had to play the year before at Miller Park, just giving them a unique experience and things that they may or may not ever get to do ever in their life. But Dee's right. I mean, the things that you remember, and if we asked every one of you guys that have played, you know, what do you remember? You remember your teammates, and of course you remember the successes and the failures and this game. But, you know, what does everybody miss? They ask a retiring athlete, what are you going to miss about this? And they all miss kind of the culture and the brotherhood. And so that's the part that it doesn't come naturally to everybody. So you kind of have to kind of encourage that and foster that a little bit, but more opportunities to do things, you know, those classic Coach D runs, going to Indian Lake and running around the lake, or going and some of you guys will remember this. I saw Ryan Meyer on here, running around the big bridge to bridge lap where Coach Pape just about got left for dead. You know, those are things that kind of band the players together, and they kind of bond through that. Running the sand dunes, Coach D, down by the river, going up to Devil's Lake. And I mean, those are things that help to build your team, you know, not just on the field.
I think I'm lucky I had that bike, or otherwise I probably wouldn't have made it.
I tell you what, Ryan, if you wouldn't have given me that bike, I wouldn't have survived past the Arboretum.
Some guys came back laying down in the back of a truck.
Yeah, I tell you,
It wasn't good.
My most horrifying memory of that.
Once we canoed down to the canoe landing on Highway Y and then ran back, I didn't realize how far it was, but Dan and Dave almost died on that one.
Well, just for those of you that don't remember that story, if you haven't been around me long enough to hear this one, I'm sorry, but this was a Coach D moment. We left from the middle school, and the team was going to run, and Coach Rawls and I were riding behind on our bicycles because we had some bigger guys on the team. And if they were going to fall behind the group, because Coach wanted them to stay together as a group, and if anybody fell behind, I was supposed to get off of my bike and give them my bike so they could ride and pedal up to the rest of the group. And and continue on. This is my very first year coaching baseball, by the way. And so they were supposed to catch up to the group and leave the bike and then continue on. Well, I think Ryan Meyer took my bike about Ganser's Motel, and I don't think I saw it again until I got to about the middle of the Prairie Bridge. And you may not think that that's a long distance, but I could swear there were buzzards circling over my head by the winery. But that's a memory, and even as an assistant coach, and even with, you talked about the Pahokie's coach. I remember Steve Pahokie riding by in his dad's truck. They were honking. Pape, do you want to ride? Nope, I'm good. I was going to be the team guy, and I was going to keep going. Should have gotten in that truck.
Yeah, and I think, Coach Pape, when you're talking about the leaders and that's not, something not natural for some guys, I think a lot of the stuff that as a teacher, we need to teach them how to do everything. Like, we really can't assume that, all right, that guy's a good ball player, he's going to be our leader, he's going to be a good leader. Really teaching them all those things, because, especially as it relates to like social skills and emotional, kind of stability, I think that is a weakness of people at a young age currently, and it needs to be taught. It needs to be taught. We can't assume that kids are going to handle failure. We can't assume that because they're good, they can be leaders. And I think that at the youth level, really working on teaching our players how to act right is really important, because I know it's really hard for a lot of kids to handle any sort of failure, to handle coaching, to handle working hard. And, coaching is a great outlet to teach kids how to do that. All right. We have been on here over an hour now, and I know that we could talk all night, but I want to wrap up the formal part of the Zoom with just one kind of final share from you guys. And I guess I want to say that if anybody wants to hang out and ask questions or talk more baseball, be my guest. We'll stop the recording, and we can just chat. I know Alex and John and I were up pretty late a couple Thursdays ago talking all sorts of baseball stuff. If anyone wants to join us, be our guest. I guess the last kind of question or thought is, what would you recommend for how to learn more about baseball, coaching, life? Do you have something that you would recommend?
I think you can just expose your guys to different things, and one's going to love to shoot a basketball, and the next one's going to love hockey, and the third one's going to love baseball. And you expose them to a lot of things, and then once they figure out what they're going to get a passion for, then you just provide them the opportunity to love their game. That's all you got to do.
Yeah, Lucas, are you talking about for players or coaches or both, or?
I think it's up to you, Coach Pape. If there's anything that sticks out for you, that resources or recommendation for all of us.
Yeah, I guess what I would say is Coach Dettman, who's been coaching for longer than a lot of the people in this Zoom have been even alive. It's important that we continue to know that there's more to learn about this game, and that there's always somebody that can provide you with some insight. And never, as soon as you start thinking, everything about this game, that's when you're falling behind, I would say. So doing things like this and just being a sponge and soaking up as much as you can is really important. And I'm as guilty as anybody in the world, because any of you that know me, I'll talk for days and days and days. And if we're talking baseball, I'll talk for months and weeks and years. So it's just great to always be open to new things. And that's what you kind of have to do with whether you're a coach or a player, is as a coach, as a young ball player, be willing to listen to a coach or somebody that might have something to offer. And one little tweak here and there could be the difference between being able to be successful and not. And as a coach, it's know that you bounce ideas off of each other. And Lucas mentioned it earlier. I mean, there are times where Razzie and Alex and Lucas and I are sitting in the varsity dugout and we're arguing about what we should do. And we kind of come to a conclusion, and ultimately, I guess at this point, it's my decision, but I never act autonomously. And I think I learned that from Coach D, because I remember sitting in the dugout, and then some of my favorite memories as a young coach are sitting in the varsity dugout after the freshman season was done. And I'm a fairly inexperienced coach, and we're getting ready for a regional or a sectional game. And Coach D will go, guys, come over here. And he'll want to, should we bunt here? I'm a 20-something-year-old coach, and he's a future Hall of Famer. Why is he asking me? But that's, I think, the beauty of this thing. And we can learn from you guys, and we know that. That's another reason why and I hope you guys all stay and ask questions and we just talk, because I love hearing other things too. So we all have a lot to learn, but I think it's important that we realize that some expertise, and how to work with kids and utilize your skills and your talents, and then don't be afraid to involve somebody else that maybe knows more about catching than you do, or knows more about pitching than you do, or you get an Alex Mayer and a John Adair on your staff that played shortstop more games than anybody else, and just absorb as much as you can.
Sounds good, guys. Thank you, Coach Pape, Coach Dettman. You guys did not disappoint. I hope we